How can parents prepare themselves for the sacrifice of missions with their children? Debbie Dunford.
Yeah, I would say it was very much a roller coaster of emotions for me. It's a very unknown place that they were going to, and I had never been, never experienced it. I shed a lot of tears the day that we actually woke up to put them on the plane. I remember putting some kind of marking on the 22 suitcases that they had. All of a sudden, no, we got to take that off. And I thought, oh, shoot. I just blew their cover again. So your mind just goes in other places.
We'll explore that challenging question today. But first, if you're a regular listener to this show, we wanted to say thank you. Without the Lord's help and without you, we wouldn't still be doing this. But we also want you to know that this show wouldn't exist if it weren't for ABWE International and ABWE missionaries like Justin, who's a missionary in a Muslim country in Asia. So let me tell you about him. One day, he was wandering a crowded street doing street evangelism. He'd been doing it every morning for 9 months with no results. He was discouraged. He sat down at an outdoor coffee shop. Local men crowded the table, fraternizing before the start of the workday. Justin tried to start a spiritual conversation with the Muslim man seated next to him, and the man, disinterested, walked off. But before Justin could even process the rejection, he heard a voice speaking to him in broken English. The voice said, "You said sins forgiven. How?" It was another Muslim man who had been sitting next to him who was listening silently the whole time. Justin, knowing the dangers of doing evangelism openly in this country, started to whisper to him about Jesus. They crept closer and closer until they were inches apart. They were looking around for danger the whole time. Justin whispered the gospel into this man's ear, and the man grabbed him by the shoulders, pushed him back, and said, "Many of us want to know this message, but we're not allowed to ask." That's what life is like in a country where evangelism is illegal, and more than 130 ABWE workers like Justin are serving in places like this. Every gift to ABWE's Global Gospel Fund goes to critical staffing, support, training, and services to advance the gospel to the lost and unreached through faithful workers like Justin. So learn more and become a partner with ABWE at abwe.org/partner. That's abwe.org/partner. Welcome to the Missions Podcast, the show that explores your hard questions to help goers think and thinkers go. I'm Alex Kochman, Director of Advancement and Communications with ABWE, joined by Scott Dunford, West Coast Advancement Coordinator and Lead Church Planter for Redeemer Church in Fremont, California. I am excited for today's topic. We'll get into that in a minute. Today's a very different episode, but first, I need to tell you just a little bit of a life update from my life. My daughter, she's 3 now. She's starting to ask some questions, and she asked me the other day, "What is love?" Which is like, okay, we're going for it. Yeah, she's 3. Yeah. In fact, she was watching Frozen the other day too, and watches the ending scene there, and she says, "Anna died and then rose again." And of course, I made a beeline for the gospel, and Jesus juked the poor kid. But yes, sweetie, those are good words. And as she's growing up and as she's getting older, Scott, and my other kids, of course, they get older at roughly the same rate. I'm thinking to myself, I could not imagine this little 3-year-old girl, if she were to ever leave, if she were to ever do what I do and think about all day, every day here at our organization, which is missions. I don't even know if I could wrap my mind around that. And that's a topic that a lot of our listeners have been asking us over the last few weeks is, what about the parent? Or the grandparent, the family? How do they say goodbye? How do they handle that? And Scott, of course, you're the missionary here. I've not been a missionary on the field. I know that you've thought about this a lot.
Well, I remember hearing, it actually first came to my mind when John Piper had preached a sermon on missions, and he quotes from a letter Jim Elliot wrote to his parents. And he quoted from a song that I grew up hearing all the time at missions conferences. You probably didn't, because you were so much cooler and more contemporary than me, Alex. Yeah. Although it did strike me when you were saying your daughter asked you, "What is love?" I hoped you responded, "Baby, don't hurt me." Yeah. But regardless, I'm sure we just ticked off somebody who will go nameless. But
par for the course.
Yes. But I was thinking of those missions conferences and the song "O Zion Haste," and it was written in 1868, kind of at the beginning of the, kind of the modern, what we call the modern missions movement. And listen to these words from, I think this is the third or fourth verse. Give of your own, or give of your sons to bear the message glorious. Give of your wealth to speed them on their way. Pour out your soul for them in prayer victorious. And all your spending, Jesus will repay. We often think of the sacrifice of going, but we don't stop to think about what it would have taken, especially at those times. But even now, the sacrifice of spending. And here, this songwriter in 1868, thinking about parents not just sending their kids off to the mission field, but really realizing they will never see them again, probably. I mean, most of the missionaries at that time that got on a ship to go to, the great reaches beyond, never returned in their lifetime. And to realize there is a cost to sending as well. So we brought in some experts today, didn't we, Alex?
Some very special experts, Bruce and Debbie Dunford. Is there any relationship there, Scott?
Well, yes, there is a strong family resemblance. This is my mom and dad. So we thought, how can we talk about this better than bringing in the people who've actually done it, at least in my life. So welcome, Bruce and Debbie, mom and dad, to our show. And we're glad to have you on. Aren't we, Alex?
Well, first of all, yes, we're very glad. Second, everybody that I know is sort of coming to me and saying, hey, we need the dirt on Scott. So maybe when we stop recording, we can do that. And or maybe while we're still recording. So we need some dirt on Scott. Anything that you have along those lines, as long as it's, PG, you're more than welcome to share. But beyond that, tell us a little bit about yourselves and your introduction to missions.
Well, I'm Bruce. My wife is Debbie. We've always had a heart, I think, for missions, but it didn't become personal, of course, until I became a pastor. We pastored in West Bend for 22 years. Prior to that, we were up at Northland Baptist Bible College. But once, when we were at Northland, I guess we weren't real sure how the Lord was going to use us at that point yet. And certainly one of the options in my mind and heart was missions. It didn't go that way. We ended up being called into the pastorate, but still had a heart for missions. And we were blessed to be able to visit a few mission fields, which was, very enlightening, challenging, huge blessing. And then when our son went into ministry, and our second son is in ministry as well. But when Scott went into ministry and then eventually announced that he felt the Lord calling them to the mission field in China, that it all became very real to us.
So, Mom, tell us a little bit. When you first got the call, and I realized, we all get it. Like, oh, praise the Lord, it was wonderful. Beside the initial great, wonderful spiritual responses, what were some of your initial thoughts, your feelings, fears when you hear the words like, "Hey, Mom and Dad, we think God's calling us to missions"?
Okay. Initially, I was excited about it, but then the reality started setting in, thinking, oh no, my kids are leaving, my grandchildren are leaving. And then when they were going to when you told us that you were going to China, it was a communist country. You only hear things, you don't really know it, but you hear about things. And then you just start wondering. And I really even questioned, is he really being called, or does he just want to go? And so I was challenging, always asking questions. Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? And, but it was kind of a fearful thing for all the unknown. One thing that did help though, is, we just started asking more questions, and we got to visit, the mission, ABWE. We went out there to visit. It just slowly started to be a little more comfortable, but initially, it was kind of a scary thing. Not knowing if I was going to see you again, how my grandkids were going to be growing up. Just those fearful things. You're my son and always will be. And so I'm always a mother hen and a mama bear about those kind of things still.
Yeah. What about you, Dad?
Well, at first it was, well, that's wonderful. You're serving the Lord, you're going where God's calling you. And then it becomes more, you realize that, the price of ministry. We all are evangelistic minded, but then when the cost of that becomes real personal, And you're thinking, my children, my son and my grandkids, my daughter-in-law are going to be going on the other side of the world. It becomes a little bit more disconcerting, I guess. Will it be safe? What it's going to be? Will the grandkids even remember us when they come back? Things like that. It became, there was a time, I guess, of, I don't know how to describe it really. It wasn't a fear, deep concern, I suppose, and hoping and praying that this is truly God's will and not just an adventuresome mind.
Mm-hmm.
You are always one to adventure.
Me?
Launch out into the tops of the trees that, you didn't belong and those kinds of things. So it was exciting and frightening at the same time.
So just to follow up a little bit, like you talked about the initial feeling, you talked about some of the progress of those feelings, like imagining, parents hearing their kids for the first time, besides your experience, what about like, was it different feelings? Like when you first heard, when your kids are raising support and they're on the road all the time, when you're packing them up and they're getting on the plane, when you first hear that they landed, can you kind of walk through, like, was there like a range of feelings you felt? Was it a roller coaster? Was it up and to the right? Help me understand that better.
As you were on the road, raising support, I knew it was going to come to the point that you guys were going to be leaving, but you were still in the States. So I knew where you were and what you were doing.
You probably saw us more then than any time. Because
we were the place for you to stay when you were going other places.
Yeah.
So it really didn't hit reality, as much, but as closer and closer you got to raising that full support to go. And then the other thing that happened was you decided to take grandma with you too. So that was another family member that was going to go as well. It was a roller coaster for me. And I think the most emotional was probably, that week before you were going to leave and making sure that we weren't going to lose Augie and Cademan and buying. And I think it was even Basil. We bought harnesses for you so you wouldn't lose the kids in the crowd.
They were 2, 5, and 6 because no one knows how old they were. They were little. You can imagine that, Alex, with little kids.
Little and
I would also like to point out too, for benefit of everybody that listens and thinks that I'm the theology nerd, that Scott here is the one who named his kids Basil and Augustine and Cademan. I'm just pointing that out.
That's true. Yeah, you flaunt it more, Alex.
I think the day that we actually woke up to put them on the plane was probably the most emotional for me. I shed a lot of tears, but I remember putting some kind of marking on the 22 suitcases that they had, tags or something. I think there was an address on it or something. I can't remember, but whatever it was, all of a sudden Tara looked at it and she goes, no, we got to take that off. And I thought, oh, shoot. I just blew their cover again, or I'm going to endanger them or whatever. So your mind just goes in other places, and it's a very unknown place that they were going to. And I had never experienced it. So I would say it was very much a roller coaster of emotions for me.
It was it ramped up. No doubt about it. At first it was, well, I'm proud of you. You're surrendering to the Lord. That's really exciting. And then you're on the road and I'm praying for your safety and a lot of miles and, but yet you're still within reach. And then when that last couple of days when we were loading up the trailer with all of your bags and that few moments at the airport, that was pretty much awful. Unloading those bags, seeing the little kids in their harnesses and a mound of suitcases and you guys all trying to get things organized. And then when we had to drive away, I think that was, we both cried. I'm going to cry again. We both cried all the way back to Wisconsin. Because you don't know. There's a lot of unknowns. You're trusting the Lord and God is good always, even if bad happens, but yet there's still that part of your heart that's laying on the curb.
Mm. Well, our listeners don't see it, but Bruce and Debbie are tearing up a little bit. And I imagine that there's people listening who feel this at a deep level, whether it's about their kids, their grandkids. So what were the things that you clung to then? So you drove away, you drove back home. What did you cling to in the weeks and months and years that followed from that point?
Well, certainly our understanding of God and His goodness. There were songs, that I think were special blessings to us that that kind of helped us express our feelings, musically. We would just sing along, with some of those, and that was helpful. And we would just cling to the fact that we know that they're in God's hands. God is good always. If we spend our life doing what we know God has called us to do, that's the best we can do, no matter how long that may be. So I think we clung to those things. The fact that we had the ability, at least somewhat, to be able to communicate, with them through Skype, or at that time it was Skype. That was huge. That was a real help to be able to log on and see their faces, see the apartment, see things. What really was hard for me was when I would get word of a setback or a disappointment or a problem, landing and having an apartment. Then you find out, that all of a sudden you don't have the apartment, and it's like, oh no, those things are hard because you want to be there to help and you can't, and all you can do is say, well, we'll pray for you. And that.
No, we'll think of you. We couldn't even say pray.
We couldn't even say pray for you. Yeah, we couldn't use certain words. So we had to think about them, or, their friends and our friends, and, that kind of stuff. So we had to talk in code, which was hard. I was always messing it up. Scott was hanging up on me all the time. But, so you cling to those things. You cling to what that gets you through what you don't know.
Was it harder getting ready and preparing to say goodbye and actually saying goodbye, or did it get easier once we were there?
I think it got better. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think it got better. Once I figured out where you're going to be living, when we could talk to you, once I figured out the code of how we're supposed to talk on Skype or on the phone or whatever, so I wouldn't get them in trouble. The thing that really helped me was to actually go and visit the field. And if any parents are able to do that, I think that just gives you have a better understanding of where they're living. When they're talking to you, you know where they're sitting, the community that they're in, you're meeting the people. And for me, the greatest fear was, and it wasn't that much longer after 9/11. So there was just the fear in the United States of Muslims and those kind of things. And so you do have those kind of thoughts. And then to know that he was going to a communist country and also going to be working with Muslim people, it was so good for me to get to actually meet them, to see the community they were living in, and to feel like this is exactly where God has them to be. And they're safer there than being back home with me. That's because it's where God wants them to be. So for me to actually get eyes on where they lived, the people they were ministering to, and even getting to be part of, like, they had an English corner at one of the universities. I got to meet some wonderful people that needed Jesus, and just to see their world and be part of that just helped me understand it a whole lot more. And that put me at a lot more at ease. One thing I remember Scott doing is, I think he got up at 3 a.m. because we were 13 hours difference. He wanted to watch the Packer game with us. So he got up really early in the morning and turned on his, we turned on our computer and faced it to the TV. So we got to watch a football game with him. It was 13 hours different time, but that just gave us some closeness, some connections. So we didn't feel so far away. So all those kind of things happening and going to visit and all just kind of calmed my fears. And I just knew that's exactly where God wanted him to be. And so then you go into super support mode, whatever you need, we'll try to get it to you, things like that. So I would say it got better. Just the fear of the unknown. I think that's the big thing. And once you understand where they're ministering and what they're doing, it helps you be more a part of it.
Now, how was it for you in thinking through the relationship with the grandkids too, and the loss of relationship there? You mentioned that a little bit. By the way, I should correct myself. I said I said Augustine. I should have said Augustine. Anyway, that's for you, Scott.
Well, we use the Catholic pronunciation.
Yeah, that's very interesting choice of yours, but we'll go with it. It's all good.
That's my wife's choice.
That's right. That's right. And what was that like for you guys, for you, Bruce and Debbie, to think through not having them in close proximity to you?
Well, that was a very real reality to us, is that we're not able to be as close to them as we want to. You can't hug them, you can't smell them, you can't squeeze them and play with them. So when we got to visit them, that was huge. To be able to spend time just tearing around with the kids and building a connection, a relationship. And it certainly was something that I think I felt anyway, a concern about not having a closeness to them. That's the blessing of us being out here now, is we can be close to them and I think catch up, on some of that. And so that's real. The only thing you can really do is, like Debbie said, with Skype at that time, or FaceTime, or whatever programs are out there now, just spend time chatting. And of course, that's probably not something that interests the kids as much as it interests the grandparents, but it is such a blessing when the kids take time, to talk to you or write you little notes and send them or whatever. And then, of course, sending gifts and sending things to them. And then for us to be able to sit and watch on Skype while they open those presents was a real blessing. It really warmed your heart.
But it also changed the way I think you thought of missionary kids in the States. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it opened our hearts to the reality of these kids coming home, from the field, leaving their parents, coming here, and the same sense of loss that we felt, with our kids going the other way, they no doubt felt coming this way. Mm-hmm. And so what we found ourselves doing, maybe just naturally or instinctively, is opening our home to them, bringing them in, making them part of our family, and kind of just being those surrogate parents and siblings to them. We had a lot of interaction, a lot of kids in our home. Well, I guess always.
I also think as parents go to the mission field and they have older children and they go later in life, just knowing that there's a church or a church family, in their sending church or whatever that would be, that will be that home away from home for those kids. It just became more real to me to be able to do that. And I think as pastor and wife, we were even able to encourage our church people to see the need there and to be a family for those kids. And I think it was a comfort to the parents to know that there was another family there that was looking after their kids and trying to be, fill in the gap for them too. So it did open our eyes to the need for missionary kids, for them coming back from a different culture to come back into America, how they're going to transition, things we could do to help make it easier for those kids to get adjusted and to transition, things we could do to help the parents as they come back, because there's just a lot of cultural changes, and our grandkids went very young. So the Chinese culture was very much a part of their growing up life, early on. And so just to come back, any of the kids that come back, just to get them acclimated to a different culture. So it really did open my eyes to a lot of that and change the way I thought about that.
I think there's a really good book that I think ABWE put out. Is it called Third Culture Kids?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We read that. And that was really helpful. Mm-hmm. That was good.
And we'll go over some more resources and things like that towards the end as well. We want to resource people that are thinking about this. But I also want to ask some questions of you guys when we come back from the break about, what about families that are different from yours? Families that are less supportive, maybe even families with unbelievers in them. And we can discuss that more with Bruce and Debbie Dunford on today's show. Back in a minute.
Hi, I'm Scott Dunford, and I'd like to share with you about a new nonprofit ministry established to help churches, Christian schools, and other ministries protect children and prevent abuse. Rich Hemar from Church Law and Tax states that the number one reason that drives churches to court is child sexual abuse. I can't think of anything more devastating to these lives, their families, and our witness before a watching world than sexual abuse that takes place in ministry. The traumatic impact often leaves the vulnerable not wanting anything to do with God or His people. Our efforts toward evangelism, discipleship, and spiritual formation are not only neutralized, but shattered. Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention was formed to help ministry leaders understand the complexities of child protection and abuse prevention. They are establishing standards and an accreditation program that will help verify that appropriate measures are in place at your church or ministry. Learn more about them. Find a helpful and free assessment tool to help you see how you measure up in this area. Go to abuseprevention.org and click on the link for this resource assessment. Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention.
And this June, attend the national conference. Go to abuseprevention.org and register with ABWE21 as the promo code to receive 20% off your ticket. That's promo code ABWE21 to receive 20% off. Brooks Buser, president of Radius International.
I am here with Mark Dever, senior pastor at Capitol Hill Baptist and president of 9 Marks.
When you go to a culture that's a different language than yours, you're ending up in a kind of majority language that's been reached. And there are other peoples still more hidden, and it's those people who are often almost entirely unreached, and they take more cross-cultural effort. Is there a way we can better train people to have more realistic expectations of what life is like in the kind of 2 steps away from my culture, and be able to sustain family life with its normal difficulties there, so that there can be a long years and even decades long witness in that culture? And it seems like Radius is set up to provide that training. Radius is about reaching unreached people groups.
Go to radiusinternational.org. Radiusinternational.org.
We're back with the one and the only Bruce and Debbie Dunford, parents of the Scott Dunford. And so we're excited to be doing this. This is super fun. And before we dive back in, and it's a heavy topic, parents saying goodbye to children who answer the call of missions. But I got to ask, it doesn't have to be the worst thing. It doesn't have to be the most embarrassing thing, but you got to tell me something stupid Scott did when he was a kid. I have to ask that just for the sake of everyone listening, but mostly myself and my own morbid curiosity.
Memories. They end up making up stuff. Usually it's about my brother, and then they just put my name on it. So whatever they say just probably isn't true, but go ahead.
Scott doesn't even have a brother.
He was the perfect child. I just can't imagine thinking of anything that he would have done that was wrong. I don't know. Do you have any memories there, Deb?
Well, just one thing that comes to mind a little bit. He was pretty young. I think maybe 2nd grade. We lived in a subdivision that was developing, and so there was a new house that was getting built, and there was dirt piles all over the place, and it was a definite construction site. And we specifically told them, do not ride your bike over there. And so Scott rode his bike over there, and he went up some dirt piles or whatever and fell and broke his elbow. And he and his brother come walking back, dragging the bike, and he broke his arm doing what he wasn't supposed to do. But that was Scott. He was adventurous. And I guess that's not a really bad thing, but that's just
a pretty tame. Yeah, that's pretty, so I got to give you props, Mom and Dad, for not talking about, all the boogers that he was flicking at the other kids in Sunday school or anything like that. So with that said, I would love to hear what advice you would give to missionaries who are considering what it's like for their families back home. But then I also want to dive deeper into some other family situations too, and maybe folks who didn't have as much unity in Christ as you guys had. But first, how'd you encourage the missionary themselves to think about the parents that are at home and are mourning the loss of those family connections and ties?
Well, I think as much as is possible, communication is important. Understanding from each other's perspective. If you can be honest and clear, that is always helpful. You just can't communicate too much, to let your folks, your parents back home know the different things that the grandkids are doing or experiencing or what you're experiencing, sharing the hard things too. We don't want to just, imagine that there's nothing tough going on over there, and we know there is, and letting us hear what that is so we can be, supportive as much as we possibly can. It's hard sometimes to feel like you're effectively supporting when you don't really understand, what it's like on, the boots on the ground there. But I think, sharing, talking about those things as much as is possible is helpful. Reaching out during those special days, birthdays, anniversaries, things like that, just to make sure there's connections there. When Scott mentioned earlier about how hard it must have been to put your children on a boat, and send them off on a 3-month journey and know full well you won't see them again. And then knowing that it could be months or years before you even receive a letter or anything. I just cannot imagine that, knowing how hard it was waiting just for days or hours to get a text, So I'd say just communicating. But then on the same hand, parents need to be understanding that your children are over there to do a job. They're busy. They're engaged. Their mind isn't back in the States wondering how grandma and grandpa are doing. Their mind is what's going on down the street or next door or in the community. And the parents have to understand that they're doing a job. We're sending them to do a job that's very consuming. And so for us as parents to be understanding and patient, as hard as it is, I think it's essential.
Yeah, here's something that I've been wondering too. So sometimes a parent will come to a child and, hey, a child come to a parent and say, hey, I'm feeling this call. I'm sensing this burden, this leading this direction. And I think we're talking about this sort of ideal situation where Scott was qualified and biblically being led, and there was confirmation, there was affirmation. The Lord opened that door, and the rest is history. I'm curious, how would you advise someone in a situation where, hey, everybody's a believer, the parents, the child, or the families involved, and yet the call isn't a call? Maybe the person, the child, is unqualified for the ministry, or maybe there's a huge blind spot in their character or their life or their ministry. And it's the parent's job in that moment to say, hang on, buddy. But that can easily be misunderstood as just attachment, right?
Right.
And so how can those things be separated? How would you approach that?
Yeah, I think that there's a number of vehicles, that need to be involved, in something like that. When a young person is sensing a call or just feeling an excitement, they went on a missions trip with a youth group and they came back and they're all excited and, this is what I want to do with my life. And, and yet, that in your heart as a parent, that's maybe not what's right or best. The church needs to be involved in that. Other believers, other spiritual authorities and leaders in that young person's life need to speak and be involved in that. It's hard to tell a young person that, no, you're not qualified. No, you're not ready. Or perhaps this isn't the field, that you should be going to. It feels very unspiritual or untrusting. Like, how can I challenge that person's quote unquote call, But if you really love them and you're really wanting what God's best is, you have to become very objective and practical.
Now, what about that situation then? And you can both answer this. And Scott, I'm curious for you as well, too, because I think this is a situation that we probably haven't experienced personally, but there's people listening who have walked through a scenario where the person with the missionary calling or leading or prompting, whatever term you prefer to use there, has parents who were unbelievers, who are unsupportive of that. What counsel would we have?
Well, we had, I remember when I surrendered to ministry, I was in banking, doing mortgage lending, had a very successful career going. And I remember when we announced to our parents and grandparents that we were going to be leaving that career, returning to Bible college, back on, to get some more training and then head to the ministry. I remember how upset my wife's grandparents were, pretty much feeling like we were throwing our life away, that I was making the dumbest mistake that there was. I remember my own dad said something to the effect that, well, I guess I'm going to have to start saving money, so I'll have to be supporting you, as the young person communicating something that I felt very strongly in my heart is what God would have us to do. It was kind of discouraging. It was a little bit hurtful, but on the same hand, you just realize that, well, they don't understand. God's good. He'll take care of us. So, we kind of tasted that, ourselves personally.
We also sought counsel from good, godly counselors, people that we trusted, men of God and women that we trusted their opinion and got support from them. Because, and then we just had to prove our family wrong, that this definitely was what God had for us. And we were right in the middle of where God wanted us to be. And if you're confident of that, you just have to take that step and do it. And they respect you after that when they see that, things did turn out. And, not that it was always rosy, but God's in control of our life. And
yeah, you certainly sense the tension even in the Gospels, where Jesus, certainly encourages honoring father and mother, and he was very honoring of his mother, but also that sense of, very clearly saying that sometimes loving and following God looks like hating, your father and mother, and we must be willing to abandon father and mother sometimes for the sake of the gospel, and how to walk that line in a way that shows honor and respect physically, while also, and even fulfills our commandment to I think that has to be weighed in, the commandment, to care for our aging parents. I know a lot of our listeners, our missionary listeners, wrestle with that as they get into, their 50s and 60s and have aging parents and have to make hard decisions. Like that we don't lose that requirement. Sometimes the body takes up that role for us, as we send out people. But sometimes it means, like our ministry changes. And as we get older, we shift and have to, go into taking care of parents mode. And so I think we strive to honor mother and father, even lost mother and father, but also recognizing, Christ is the ultimate. So my advice to those who are considering missions, whose maybe parents aren't believers, is you should probably even move more slowly and more cautiously and more deliberately, and talk to someone who've gone through that. We could put you in touch with some of our other missionaries who've dealt with that. And there's many people going to missions whose parents aren't believers or who aren't supporters of them going into missions at that time. You should go slowly and carefully and honor your parents through that process. But in the end of the day, that's why you have a church, and that's why you sometimes have to obey the Spirit, even when it goes against sometimes what our earthly father and mother want. What would you say to that, Alex? I'm curious.
I would have to echo everything that you said, Scott. I think that's where Christ's teaching maps over directly onto our situation, that in one family, there's one divided against two and two against three. And I do feel like in some of our theological circles, it's very possible to de-emphasize the role of family, because we talk about sacrifice and going and mission and who our true brothers and sisters and father and mother are in the Lord. There's this other impulse, though, that overemphasizes family, right? And that can make family the sort of end all and be all of, the blessings of being in the covenant and those sorts of things. And I do think that we have to really dive into what Jesus says there, that, sometimes there is division in a household. And we've felt this personally, because my wife's family are not all believers. And there was some early skepticism in our relationship, as I was at that point saying, hey, I'm going to get into full-time ministry. And actually at that point, I was in the application process to work for a different missions agency. And that's a story that we'll tell sometime offline. But there was some skepticism there for sure. It is a matter of, like you said, Debbie, trusting that the Lord's going to work it out in your lives, not in such a way of like, it's not about vindicating me. It's not about showing that, yeah, I engineered my life so much better and I was right and you were wrong. It's that, hey, you know what? Yeah, I am youthful. Yeah, I am naive. I'm worse than you know, but my Savior, who you don't know, is going to take care of me, and my life's going to bear that out. And I think that, beyond that, it just takes a lot of wisdom and truth and grace and speech that's seasoned with salt. These aren't easy issues. So we've gotten some audience questions about this. And we do want to be sensitive to the fact that there aren't one size fits all answers for this. There are circumstances where the Lord might be leading you to stay. You might have a different job at home. But there's wisdom for all of these scenarios. Curious to hear what more advice that you guys would have for people in general and for parents and grandparents of those currently considering missions.
Well, one of the things that I just thought of here is I remember thinking this, that I couldn't trust my own heart. I really wanted this, when we went into ministry, but I wasn't confident in my ability to understand my own heart in it, because it is deceitful and desperately wicked above all things. So we did, like Debbie said, we got counsel. We talked to our pastor. We talked to other godly friends, and did our best to, heed the advice, of others, so that I knew it wasn't just an emotional thing of my own, or even a pride thing. Sometimes you can think in your heart, well, I can do that. I can do it better, and it becomes even a matter of pride. But getting godly counsel, I think, is really important. Trusting, or I should say, opening up to people that you can trust to speak truth to you, instead of just mirroring back what they think you want to hear. That's important. I think as you're just making these decisions that are really life changing, directing type things.
What would you say? Maybe I'll just give you some specific things to a parent or grandparent that's listening that says, well, it's one thing to send, your son, he's got a daughter and kids, they're going to be fine, but sending over my single daughter, like, that is too much. What would you say to a dad that's struggling with sending over a single daughter?
I don't know. I haven't had to do it, but that is tough, because we've had single ladies come to our church, to raise support. I was very concerned about them, where they were going to be, who they were working with.
Sure.
What is their support structure there? Are they alone? Are they with another family? Is there more than one family that they're going to be with? What's their role in the field going to be? And of course, then are they qualified for that role? That kind of thing as well. But then I guess then it boils down to the conviction: is this truly God's call in their heart, and trusting that. I would want to make sure, if it were my daughter, that I would know all those things, the specifics. And I recognize oftentimes that changes when you get to feel you're going one direction, and then the zigzags, things change, direction changes, but still being careful to know that she's putting herself where God would have her, in the right situation, not under temptations, things like this.
I think, what I'm hearing you say, and I think I agree with that, is like recognizing that worry is a sin, but like the wisdom that comes with experience and concerns may actually be that voice helping you to think through things. Doesn't mean it's not right to go, but also I know it's funny, as you're talking about, and you got your calling into ministry. I remember you're like 35, right? Well, now I look at 35 and think, young, you don't know what you're doing. But at the time, you were the oldest student in Bible college, one of the older ones. And everyone's like, wow, this old gray head here. And now I look at 35 and think, I just was starting to realize I didn't know anything at 35, and recognizing that with age comes, sometimes overcautiousness, but also sometimes right perspective on wisdom of what to be looking for. So that's good.
Scott, can I ride your coattails a little bit there? I think that's a word of wisdom for people listening who might be college students, young people who found this podcast because their parents are giving resistance to the idea of them being a missionary overseas. And I think the word of counsel to them is, don't throw out your parents' wisdom, assuming that it's godly wisdom and that they're coming at it from a biblical perspective. Don't throw that out. Frankly, it would be a bad parent would have no concern for the safety of their children. And each situation is different. And as much as we see the importance of missions throughout Scripture, we also don't see God's people in a rush too often. And God has his ways and his timings. And you can still follow the commandment to honor your father and mother while pursuing God as a missionary. You don't typically have to choose one or the other. And so listen to your parents. Maybe they don't have all of the same perspective, and that's okay. But final words of advice, and then how can people reach out to you if they'd like to connect?
Just be open to listen. I think we can't shut our children down when they're talking about these new ideas and something they want to do. We need to keep an open door so they talk about it freely, be supportive, help them get the resources that they need so they can do the job better or make a better decision.
I would also add to that, involve them in ministry now.
Yeah.
Where they are, where they're living. You don't just suddenly flip a switch and boom, I'm a missionary because I cross a border. Start, showing gospel interest and gospel love, now even as a young person. There's so many ways to serve, in your community, so many ways to reach out, whether they're in high school or college or just at a job that they're working in. I guess I would want to see in my young person a heart for that before they tell me they're going to go overseas and do it. I want to see them doing it here. Are you part of we involved our kids right from young age. I remember taking the boys with me on visitation. We would take them with us to the nursing homes and where we served, and they would get involved in people's lives there in their own rooms. They would take their Bibles and launch off into, down a hallway and start meeting with people on their own. And I remember watching Scott get engaged with a lady and trying to witness to her. And he'd come home and open his Bible and study because she had questions he couldn't answer. It was a wonderful experience for them. And so parents really should start thinking of their children as mission vehicles, even young, training them and equipping them in the event that God does call them to a vocational ministry like that.
Yeah, that goes back to a conversation we had with an ABWE worker back 2-3 years ago, very early in the life of this show. There was a conversation about how to train and nurture MKs, missionary kids. And one of the points that he made was that before they're MKs, they should be kid missionaries, KMs. Mm-hmm. And that gets at exactly what you're saying here is, should it be shocking to us if a child responds with a missionary calling or prompting or burden if they've already been living that way? And what an affirmation of godly parenthood that would be the outcome of the type of missional lifestyle that a child would grow up with. And from that standpoint, we should aim for that, whether we've embraced the idea of our children living overseas or not. We should aim for that.
One other thing that you guys had mentioned to me earlier, I just want to make sure I highlight this because it fits with the demo. But you had mentioned how helpful it was, one, to go to the field and visit. That kind of comes naturally, I think, to most parents. But another one that I encourage parents to do, and missionaries listening, encourage your parents to do, would be come to demo. Come to headquarters and just meet people. Like, I think knowing our regional director, knowing the people behind the scenes, getting a heart for the leadership, helped you trust that we were in good hands. Right. Wouldn't you say?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I forgot to mention that. That was a huge confirmation and a comfort to our heart when we were able to spend a week, get to meet these, various people that you don't otherwise see. But and to get to see what kind of support structure and care structure is really there. That was huge. That was a real blessing.
And I would say to ABWE's credit, and probably other mission agencies are the same way, but the only two people who are more honored than the missionaries themselves, or maybe three, is probably the sending church pastor, the missionary kids that usually get honored a lot and loved a lot. At least that's our heart and desire to do that. And then the parents of sending. And so if you're a parent listening, just come to demo to see what's going on, or just pop into the office and tell us who your parent, who your kids are. We want you to come by and that would be a huge honor to the headquarters to have you there.
Absolutely. And Scott, speaking of resources that exist, I know you have a few you want to recommend before we wrap.
Well, just a couple that are out there. I mean, I obviously reading blogs, listening to shows like the podcast, I think help people think through issues that their kids are thinking through. But also, there's a book out there called Third Culture Kids, which was mentioned, and I highly recommend that. We can put that in the show notes. It just helps to understand some of the dynamics of why do your grandkids love soccer and not football, and some of the unique struggles they come back speaking English and looking, in some ways like they belong in America, but in other ways really just don't. And how do you help them with that? And then there's a book out there that's recommended. I have not read this book, but it's got good recommendations called Parents of Missionaries: How to Thrive and Stay Connected When Your Children and Grandchildren Serve Cross-Culturally, by Cheryl Savigo. I think that's how you pronounce it. And highly recommend, we recommend those two books to check out.
Well, this has been a joy for me, hopefully for everyone as well. And I think it's only fitting to conclude with some scriptures, because we serve the God who's faithful to 1,000 generations, to those who love him and keep his commandments, Deuteronomy 7:9, and Psalm 145, verse 4, one generation shall commend your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. So thank you for listening today. But before you leave, please remember to share this show and also leave it a positive rating and a 5-star review in your podcast app of choice. That helps the algorithms get this in front of more people who can be blessed by it. And if you want more content on missions, theology, and practice, head on over to missionspodcast.com. And if you have a question or a topic suggestion of your own, email alex@missionspodcast.com. Until next week, thank you for listening.